I'm a development team lead for Sage, and today we're going to go on a journey together, learning all about Lightning components and Lightning experience and all of this fun stuff. With me today we have Rahul and Cyan, who are going to be able to help you through any problems you might have. So if you find that as you're doing the exercise, you're having issues with something, you're having problems getting set up, just give them a signal and they'll come over and sort you out. So at Sage, we have a number of products that use Salesforce. The one that I work on is called Financials. And over the course of the last 2 years, we have spent a huge amount of time moving from Visualforce pages to Lightning components. And we were very early adopters of the Lightning experience. Some might argue that we were too early. We've had a few challenges over the way. We've had to work quite closely with Salesforce to resolve these issues. And now we have a framework of over 300 Lightning components. So what we'd like to do is, we thought it would be a good idea to put a course together, put a quick little workshop together, so you guys could benefit from the experience that we've had now that things are a little bit more simplified, a little bit more easy to manage. So Cyan's passing out exercise guides. What we're going to do is I'm going to talk you through a little bit of an introduction to Lightning first, and then we'll get on to the exercises, and for each stage I'll do a live demo, hopefully, assuming it all works, showing you how it all works, and then you'll get time to complete that afterwards. So don't worry too much about having to keep up or having to do anything now. That's absolutely fine. So let's get started then. By the end of this workshop, you hopefully will understand a bit more about Lightning. You'll have been able to create your own Lightning component from scratch. You will have added styling, and you'll understand a bit about the Lightning design system that we use to apply styling on this. You will have made that component dynamic, so you'll connect to an Apex class, and then you'll make a call, you'll return the results, and you'll process those in your Lightning component. And then what we want to do is make a form that you can update a record, or create a record in this case, using no Apex at all, using the Lightning data service. So we're hopefully going to cram all of that into an hour, but we'll see how we get on. Can I get a show of hands who has built a Lightning component before? Okay, there's about half. Who's used Lightning data service before? Okay, interesting, good. So we're getting, that's good. So first of all, a bit of an introduction to Lightning. It's starting to get a little bit confusing in terms of what Lightning actually is. So we've got Lightning Experience, the Lightning App Builder, the Lightning Data Service, the Lightning Design System, Lightning Out, Lightning Process Builder, and now the Force.com platform is going to be renamed to the Lightning Platform according to the spring release notes. So it's all starting to get a little bit much in terms of understanding the differences between these things. So what I wanted to do was take 5 minutes just to go through the basics so that you understand if you're looking to use Lightning to create components or to use components from the App Exchange, what it is that you actually need to care about at this stage. So Lightning experience in itself is not as complicated as it sounds. There are two main aspects to it, and then another thing at the bottom we'll talk about in a second. So you have the Lightning component framework. The Lightning component framework allows you to build Lightning components, as you might expect. The Lightning design system is the styling that means you can effectively make your components look like the other Lightning components that exist in the Salesforce architecture. And then finally, the Lightning App Builder is a drag and drop interface that you can use to present your components to your customers. So what are Lightning components? Well, they are effectively just reusable code elements built to the Lightning component framework. It's a modern client-based architecture. You're aiming for Visualforce was multiple pages. This is now very much going towards single-page applications. That's the aim. It's event-driven, supports HTML5, CSS3, that kind of thing. And the idea is you can use now, when we first started, there were very few standard Salesforce components. We had to build everything ourselves, which is part of the reason why we now have 300 components. But now that Salesforce has really gotten things moving on the Lightning front, they have a fair few components that you can use yourself. So you can use their standard components, you can create your own custom components, which is what we're going to be doing today, or, and this is probably something you should recommend, is that if you're looking for a component, take a look on the App Exchange, because the chances are it's already there for you. You may have to pay for it. So why would you use Visualforce or Lightning? What are the different cases? Salesforce says both are still relevant. In Sage, we have committed to removing all of the Visualforce pages from our application. We still use it for rendering PDFs, and actually Salesforce recommends that you still use it for rendering PDFs. They've done that work. I don't think they're interested in doing it again, and at the end of the day, it's a PDF. It doesn't matter whether it's Visualforce or not. And that's effectively it. Now, the other thing to mention here is that if you have an application that has a huge number of Visualforce pages and you're looking to move things over to Lightning, you don't have to ditch everything straight away and rebuild it all in Lightning. You can actually style your Visualforce pages with the Lightning style sheets, which is a bit of a halfway house between the two things that could make that migration a little bit more easy for you. It's not something that we're going to talk about in this. It's a completely different topic, but it's something that might be worth looking into. So, here's our workshop. What are we building? Bob is a fictional service desk manager. He's looking to reduce the number of open cases that his team has, and his first priority, he's decided, is to make the sales team more aware of the number of open cases they have. So he's asked for a Lightning component to be built on the sales homepage to show the number of open cases. Now, the exercise guide is available online as well if you guys want to take it away with you, but there's enough copies to go around, so we're okay, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into here. I'm going to have to sit down, so apologies for that, and then we'll talk through it. And as I say, I'll talk through each section, give you a bit more details on the background of it, and then you can get some time to do it yourself, so don't worry about that. So, we're on our sales homepage. This is a completely blank org. I've just created a new developer org for this. And what we're going to do is we're going to open the developer console, and then we're going to create our first Lightning component. So I just go to New, Lightning component, and then I'm going to give it a name of Open Cases. You want to be in the Lightning experience for this. Yeah.
Does it matter if it's a developer org or a playground?
It shouldn't, but if you have problems, let me know. So once we've created the new component, we're going to add some markup. The first thing we need to do in order to get it to render on the page, we have to implement. Now, there's a few things that go on here, but effectively there's tags you can add to your component to allow it to display in certain scenarios, to allow it to be used as a standard override, and different things like that. There's a list of them that is worth kind of knowing what the options are. So for this one, we're talking about FlexiPage. Whoops. Available for all page types, and then save that out. Excuse me, implements live demos. So I'm just going to put a little bit of text in here as well, just so that we can see it on the page. So I'm going to say open cases, and we'll just leave it at that for now. So now you have a component, that's all it took, but we need to display it on the sales homepage. So the best way to do that is to jump into the homepage, go into Setup, click Edit Page, and then you'll see the Lightning App Builder. So what it's doing is it's going to take that page and break it up into the relevant components, and you can see as you hover over them the different sections being highlighted, and all of these correspond to components. You can remove them, you can move them around, you can do whatever you want to do with those. There is a list of standard components that Salesforce has made available to us. I want to point out that these standard components is not an exhaustive list of all of the components Salesforce has made. These are just the ones that you can use directly from the Lightning App Builder. So we'll see later on we create a Lightning Input component. And that's something that you would use in your component that is provided by Salesforce. So this is just the ones that you can use directly in a Lightning App Builder page. And you'll see at the bottom here we've got our custom component of open cases. Now if I was to remove this implementation, you would find that actually that doesn't display anymore. Similarly, if you guys are having any problems so far when you get to it, if you don't see it, it's probably that you need to have My Domain enabled or that you haven't typed that implementation correctly. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to put it up at the top above the assistant because Bob thinks it's really important. So you'll see straight away, you can actually see that. If you squint, you can see that being displayed there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save it so we can see it on the proper page. You can just activate it. That's fine. We don't need to worry about these for this. and then jump back to the home page. And what you should see is the exact same page, but with a tiny text that says open cases up at the top. So the component's there, but it's a bit rubbish. We don't really want to do that. So the next thing is to add some styling. Now, let me just jump into this. So the Lightning design system is a big part of creating components. And the Lightning design system effectively is, there's two teams in Salesforce, as far as I understand it. You have the people who are creating the component markup and the CSS to make things that look like Lightning components. And then you have a second team, and they're taking those designs and actually building working components out of them. So what you'll find in here is a list of components that are available for you to make yourself. For example, let's have a look. Well, I suppose cards as good as any. You actually have a list of example markups, so you can copy all of this, put it into your component, and it'll display a card that looks like this. But there's no functionality in there. So some of these components might be dynamic, like for example, a tree component might have a little icon to drop down an element of the tree. But in this, it doesn't do anything because this is just the markup and the styling. So if you were going to use that component yourself, you'd have to go through and actually create that JavaScript yourself and do all of that. Some of them, when they've caught up with what the SLDS team have done, has this option up at the top, which is to actually access the Lightning component itself. So in that case, this is what we're going to do. So rather than all of this, all of this component here, I'm pointing at the screen for some reason, you actually just need to look at this one. So you can see there's a lot less markup involved because this is an actual Lightning card component. You pass in attributes like the title, the icon name, that kind of thing, and then you can set attributes where you pass in more complex body components. So if there is a component available, it's generally a good idea to use that rather than creating your own. But at the same time, they are still being developed. There are still some issues with them. You may find that it doesn't suit your needs, and in that case you can fall back to the Lightning design system. So what I want to do now is actually just grab the content out of this one and then we'll modify it. So I'm going to get rid of my open cases and I'm just going to modify this. So I'm going to set I can get rid of the actions for now, and then I can set my icon name to standard case. I can get rid of the footer. Interestingly, they've actually changed this markup since I did the guide earlier this week, so things are definitely moving forward. And then, give me a second. And then you can see you've got things like title attributes and things like that that go in here. So in my case, I just want to say the title is open cases. And I'm going to just put some text in here to say there are X open cases and leave it at that. So now if we refresh with a bit of luck. Now this is a point. You see that the first time I refreshed it to display the old component and the second time was the new one. We have a huge number of problems where you may be modifying a component and it's actually being cached, so you don't notice that that change has taken place. So what I wanted to do was show you how to get by that, because it took us about 5 different people in Salesforce to find a solution to this. So if you go to session settings, there's a caching option in here. So it's session settings and then enable secure and persistent browser caching to improve performance. If you disable that option, it means that every time you refresh, you're getting the most up-to-date version of the Lightning component. The snag with that is, every now and again, Chrome will crash because they think it's a Chrome issue. Chrome obviously has no opinion on this at all, but you may find that you get the browser actually timing out when you've done that. So you've got to be a little bit careful about when you use that or use Firefox. It's completely up to you. So now, every time I refresh, it should be the most recent component. And you can see on here now we have an icon, which was the icon we defined as standard cases. You've got the title component and then the body defined in there. So that's everything for the first 2 parts of that. So you guys want to have a go? Go for it. Okay, cool. have a look. That's all it is. Once you've enabled yeah, so you need to enable my domain. So just pick a domain, check availability, register. You'll get an email, and then you have to go back in again and actually enable it for all users. So it might take you a couple of minutes. Yeah, that's all it is for now, and then we're going to add dynamic next as the next part. If you jump into, just press that one there, it'll show you without the line numbers. Then to the left, next, that one, yeah. And then that's it, and then it's easier, and just not that component bit, but everything inside.
Yeah, I did see it.
When you press that page.
Do you have my domain enabled?
I'll deploy my domain.
Yeah, if you go back in there, there's a two-step process to it. So click on that, and it'll take you through, and then it'll probably just say you need to enable all users, and that'll be fine. That one there currently says card header. That's it. As I said, this has all changed just since 2 days ago when we put this together, so it's a little bit different from how it looks. Yeah, and then you can change the icon name rather than account to case, which is that one. And then yeah, we don't need a footer in this case, so we can get rid of that. But it's worth having a play because you can see what sort of effect it has having a footer and things like that.
We've just introduced into our like a lot of people, I think it's probably come to that time now where it's just about got enough in there that it's useful.
Yeah, it's interesting because everybody seems to have waited like a year just to get it at the point, and we didn't do that at all. And we've created everything. We've got list views, we've got all sorts of stuff that we have editable data tables that we created ourselves, and of course all of this is going to get removed when Salesforce gets theirs up to scratch. But most of it's still better. But we created our own modal component. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. The only problem is we went through so many headaches that now aren't problems that we didn't need to solve them if we just had the things available. But there's not much you can do. Okay.
Sorry, my Lightning is not installed. I don't know anything to do with coding.
Okay, that's fine. That's not a problem. You don't have to play along. It's just
It's a bit out of my remit, so but I'm just sort of getting introduced to Lightning because
Okay.
I was using it.
That's no problem. I mean, it's very much a kind of developer workshop, but it'll give you a good overview of the kind of work involved in doing these things. So don't worry about it. It's fine. It's all right. How you doing? Yeah. Don't worry. It's all right. I think there's a few of us having problems, so I might stretch things out a little bit to give you time to do it. Okay.
It doesn't like drag it onto a stage like page, you can only do it to a sales page.
Yes, so we do accounting and payroll software and ERP.
They should be integrated with Salesforce in the sense of if a record was created in Salesforce, a billing record, and they need to process it through Sage.
Yeah, we can't access it again.
In the way that is that names, is it native?
There's a number of third parties that handle integrations. I don't have a list of kind of components that are just available to download from the App Exchange, but there will be some things out there, and if not, there are kind of approaches that we can take to do API calls and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit of a discussion, really. That's it.
Oh, okay, like, yeah, I guess like we spoke to
Yes. How are you doing?
Yeah, not sure. Maybe I've got something in the wrong place here.
It's so what you've got is if your tag has a slash at the end, it's self-closing, which you don't want in this case. So all you can do is basically just get rid of that one as well, and then that means that the attribute is the whole content of that rather than just that one bit. So you've got icon name standard case. That you could probably just get rid of because you're effectively setting the icon again there, which you don't need to do. So you can take, because that was originally the buttons, wasn't it, the actions.
Right.
So you could take that, those or a set and everything in between that out.
Everything in here out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and those two lines as well, you can get rid of those.
Ah, this one as well.
Yeah. That's fine. And then that way all you're left with is you've got your card component, your title, the icon, and then the body, which now says card body. So if you give that a save, that should hopefully work. I would expect it to display something. Is it added to the app builder? It may just be that page was cached then. So if you jump back in and just refresh it a couple of times, it might sort itself out. And as I say, it's a nightmare, yeah, because you tend to forget that it's got the caching, and you think, well, why is this change not having any effect? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right, so I think we'll move on then. I appreciate some people didn't have my domain enabled, and it might take a little bit of time to get that set up, but we have quite a lot to go through, and I would like to at least be able to demo a lot of it. So the next part of this is making the component dynamic. So at the moment there are X open cases, which is great, but it doesn't really tell them anything. So what we need to do is make something so that that X can be turned into a number, and the number can come from the list of cases on the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an attribute called case count. So an attribute is basically, if you think of it as, it's a variable in the component markup. So when you set it, it will be set across the scope of the entire component. So you can say, all right, attribute name is case count, and I'm going to make it an integer, which is a number field, and then I'm going to default it to 0. And again, that's self-closing, so that's all that is. And then in the body area, rather than the X, what I'm going to do is add what they call a merge field. And a merge field is basically you specify the attribute that you want to display, and then it'll display the value of that attribute in the markup. So the syntax is like this, case count. And the idea is that you, what's the best way to describe this? So the idea is that you're accessing, V means you're accessing one of the attributes that is defined in the markup. You'll see later on we use C dot, which is accessing the controller. So it's if V is effectively for the view, which is this markup that we're looking at the moment. So there are so many open cases, but it's not going to do anything. So what we need to do is create a new controller, and we're going to create an Apex controller. And then we're going to tell the JavaScript controller, which you'll see in a second, to connect to that. It'll run a query, it'll come back with the results, and then we'll populate that. So it sounds like a lot, but it's actually quite a straightforward thing. So I'm going to create myself a new Apex class, and I'm going to call it cases controller. And that's it. So when you're creating methods that need to be accessed here, there's a slight difference between this and Visualforce. Typically, you can't have variables in the method itself because there can't be any context. So typically the methods are all static, and you actually also have to have an or enabled tag at the top as well. So it's worth reading about the differences as well, because it's been a while since we've done Visualforce now, so I'm starting to lose track a little bit. I'm just going to So I'm creating a public static method that returns an integer called getCaseCount, and all it's going to do is return the results of a SOQL query. So return So basically, return all of the cases, the number of cases that are open. And because I'm just returning that directly, it'll take the count of the cases and return that as a number, and that'll go back to the JavaScript once we've wired that end up. So this is it. The only thing I would mention here as well, and I've added a note in the example, is that because the difference between Visualforce and Lightning is that Lightning is run in the system context and Visualforce is typically run in the user context. So you actually have to do permissions checking yourself. So you'll see examples dotted around on the internet about making sure that the fields that you're querying are accessible, and you should do those checks before you actually do this. So in a production code, you wouldn't just do the query, you would have to do a check around it as well. But for the sake of time, we'll just assume that nobody wants to do any harm to us, and that's fine. So the next thing I need to do is create a handler in the component markup. So when we can define a list of controller methods in the JavaScript, but what we want to do is make something that's called by default when the component's loaded. So you need to have an init handler in here, and the syntax for that is an aura handler. The name has to be init, and the value is this, and it's effectively just setting the context to be this component. And then the action is the name of the method that you want to call. So in our case, I'm going to create one in a second that's called doInit. And that's all it is. So all this is going to do is when the component's loaded, it's going to try and call that JavaScript method called doInit. Now, in the developer console, it's quite handy because as soon as you click on this controller, because it doesn't exist at the moment, it's going to create one for you. So it's already created it. The syntax here is it's effectively a JSON object, but don't worry about that. We're going to rename this method and use it because it's an example method. We don't need it. So doInit is going to be the name of the method. Now, you've got your handler, which is going to happen, it's going to be called as soon as a component is created. It's going to call doInit, and that is going to run this. Now, for the controller in JavaScript, you have to have these three parameters to be passed in: component, event, and helper. And you'll notice that this was automatically created when we created the component controller. So what we want to do is go through and call the server. Now, you'll notice in the guide, I've got a link for you to follow because this is actually quite a complex piece of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how it works. We'll paste it in and then I'll talk you through it all. So this entire thing looks really complicated. It's actually not too bad. So I'm just going to grab the section out of there and then paste it in the controller. Now, in a production example, you use this a lot, because all you're doing is calling the server, returning results, calling the server, sending some data over. That's effectively the function of Lightning. So what we have is a base component that all of the other Lightning components extend with a helper containing this method. So you'll define a method where you can pass in which action you want to call, what parameters you want to send it, and even the callback, once it's returned the results, what you want it to do with it. And then that means that all you have to do is call that one helper and it does it all for you. But for now, let's just think about it in this one context. So we have a doInit action. It's going to get the action, and this is effectively referring to the Apex controller method. So that's this one. So it wants to be get case count. So we're going to set that there. So we're effectively saying get me that Apex method so that I can call it. You have the option to pass in a list of parameters. We don't actually need that for this one because all we're doing is returning that query results, so we can get rid of that. And then you have to set a callback, and this is effectively an anonymous function in JavaScript that will do something with the response from the server. So in this case, all of this that you can see inside here, so basically all of this is just the callback, is just what you want it to do without that response. And then down at the bottom, you have the enqueue action, which is effectively to say, now that we built that action, we want you to carry it out. And it's an asynchronous thing. It doesn't happen immediately, and that's quite important when you come to doing more advanced stuff. Because if I was to say, I'm going to do all of this, there's going to be something in here that updates my markup in my controller, but then I actually put another piece of code down here, that will execute before the response from the server, typically, because it has to go away and come back again. And we had a problem where somebody was closing the component down after the enqueue action. So the component was firing the call to the server, then closing itself, and then when the response came back, there was nothing to handle it. So you've got to be a little bit careful about how you handle this stuff. So inside the callback, the example they have is quite thorough, and as I say, you would typically have this in a helper. So you get a state back in the response, and you get a return value. If the state is successful, you can do something with that response. If it's not successful, you can log some error messages, you can now put it to the screen, you can do whatever you want to do. So all that is a number of different cases for different states and what you want to do with it. So in this case, they're alerting to the response from the server. What we want to do is set case count. So very simply, all you have to do is say component set, pass it the name of the attribute you want to set, which again is v.caseCount, and then pass it the return value. And that means that as soon as it comes back from the server, that 0, which is the default for that attribute, is going to come back and be set to the number of open cases. The only other thing to bear in mind, and this is kind of clean up because we've been copying examples from different sources, it passes in the component with the name component in this case, But in the example that you copied from, they'd use CMP, and you'll see that when you're using examples on Salesforce, they switch between them quite a lot. So if I save this now and ran it, you get an error saying we couldn't find CMP. So I'm going to just change that to component so that it's consistent. So you've got component, 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 and we're not using it anywhere else, so that's fine. So now, if I go in and refresh that page, and again, you don't need to go back to the app builder and save it or anything like that. It should just take it straight through and work for you. If you refresh that page, hopefully it should show the number of open cases. Okay, cool. So, live demos. So, you'll see this a lot when you're debugging Lightning, is that it comes up with a component error has occurred and then says, no, I just don't know what's going on. So, yes, I remember what I've missed. The controller and the markup. Yeah, so if I read my own guide, that would be absolutely fine. That would be much more useful. So basically, you have to set... Yeah, good. Well, there'll be a lot of them still to come, don't worry. So yes, you have to set a controller in the component itself, which I think should be documented on there. Yeah, it is. That's why I skipped ahead to put it in, that's the thing. Okay, cool. So basically, yes, you have to define a controller, otherwise it doesn't know which Apex class to use. So you just say controller equals, and then open cases controller, sorry, CTRL, which is the name of the Apex class. Save it out, refresh it again, cross your fingers. And that's it. And there's 3 open cases. It's worth me pointing out as well that you'll notice if you keep an eye on it when I refresh, it'll start off as 0 and then it'll jump into 3, and it'll do that every time because it doesn't cache between when page refreshes. So it's going to go to the default, and then when the response comes back from the server, it'll update to 3. So you can see that really if you were looking for a better user experience, you'd maybe have a spinner or you'd have something else going on there so that it wouldn't just show 0 and then jump in. But again, for the demo, that's fine. So that's that for that section. Have a go, see how you get on, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Oh, okay.
The minute, yeah, maybe a bit later.
Sorry.
The second part, but I did the first one.
Okay.
Okay, and I also create the custom domain. So now in this domain, so supposed to see the component down
You
here.
should. Let me see your component markup.
Now if I miss the
Nearly there. So if you it's flexi page available for all page types. So if you just change that to flexi page, you should hopefully find that works. Yeah, so the app builder creates flexi pages, which is why it has that. That's it.
Is that for to be able to use it with customers? That's why it's
Yeah, that's good. It makes sense for that.
What time does it finish? Yeah, is it 10 past? 10 past, it's fine. Gonna be out of time.
That section, right? Thank you.
I don't know. Yeah, I didn't expect it to take as long to talk through. That's the thing. But I'll have a couple of minutes and we'll do just a full run through of the next things, and at least I can see it. Yeah, because that's it. We've got.
Oh, okay, so we choose that component.
You don't have anything as a class. Set it back. You don't need it all actually.
You need, oh,
I think so. I'm just about to paste this
Yeah,
section.
you comment this for now.
Yeah.
Comment this line.
Right, okay. Where are we at?
not before that.
And maybe when it comes to function. Right, so
What value is it?
whatever method it is. This should be that one.
This one here.
And
Right, okay.
Yeah.
does that need to be taken up along as well? Just that.
Yeah.
And there.
That's good. That's still very good because then you have this country and this country and this country.
Yeah. So it's quite into the code inside. Well, and everything else, you know, processes and whatever, do all that. Yeah, well, I mean, we've just switched over to Lightning ourselves. Well, it's, it's been over a few years, but it's only just recently that we thought actually the benefits outweigh the cons.
It's good.
Yeah.
Now it's
Yeah. It's like they put it out there for me to test it.
this seems whatever it is.
Components. Right, I see. So it's consistent. Okay. There's a few places, isn't there?
Yeah.
Remove the subparameters call. Sorry, which one? Where are we? 9.8. Right, the action. In the success state.
Oh, yeah,
It's
it's,
case count.
Yeah. No.
Success.
Just text.
Is it there? From send the actual group case
Just use full
It was here.
Right. So
just before that,
yeah. Right. So you need to say that's parameters. Set.
components.
Sorry, set what? Sorry.
So that the component that's set.
Component dot set. And then that's LSC. Right. A long day.
That's the problem with the workshops in the afternoon, isn't it? Yeah.
Past 4 in the morning, it's an ungodly hour.
That's all right. I think we'll have to start the next section, but we can give you a hand later on as well. That's great, thank you. Okay, so we're not going to have time to go through the next part in detail just because things have overrun a little bit. So what we'll do is try and just I'll give you a shortcut version, give you examples of how it all works so you can get a feel for Lightning Design System. We've also included modals. So the next part of this is Bob would like his team to be able to manage cases with a simple form. So the idea is really just we want them to be able to create a new case from a button that's displayed on that component. So I'm just going to quickly run through, and as I say, I've kind of cheated a little bit and changed the code while you guys have been working. So apologies for that, but it's just for time's sake. So everything is more or less still the same. What we've done is we've added a list of actions on the component now, and there is a button, and the button is called New, and it handles, when you click on it, there is a controller method in the JavaScript called handle new. And basically, if you look in here now, we have handle new, which will create a new component. So what we've done is we've allowed it to display a modal. So if I go through and show you the end result of this, this might help illustrate what's going on. So there's now a button. When you click the button, it displays a modal. The modal has case subject with a space for you to add the subject, and then you can click save. So the modal component is something that Salesforce provides through the Lightning overlay library. And so there's a modal, and then there's a popover components as part of that library, and they'll probably add more as time goes on. And basically what it does is you can call it, you can create a new component of a certain type. So in this case, I've created my new case component, which I'll talk about in a second. And then when it dynamically creates that component, if it's successful, it'll find the overlay library. It'll say, show me a custom modal, and I'm going to inject that content, which is the modal, the component it's created, into the body. So what you end up with is a dynamically created component rather than something you have to add from the app builder. This is just created on the fly and then pushed onto the screen because of the overlay library showing this custom modal. So the content itself is not a modal, it's the contents within it, effectively. So the new case component is quite simple, and it uses Lightning Data Service. So the idea is we don't have any connection to Apex here. We're not doing anything with that. What we have is the force record data, which is the Lightning Data Service embodiment, if you like. And what you do is you specify the field that or the target fields object that you want it to set. And then you can either specify a list of fields that you want it to return, or in this case I've specified a layout. So I want to say I want to get all of the fields from the full layout. So if you modify the layout, those fields will be accessible as well. Then what I've done is added a Lightning input component, which is just the text box that you saw. And I'm utilizing this new case object that's being set by Lightning Data Service, and I'm just grabbing the subject field out of that, and then again setting the label. So what you'll find is that that is all handled dynamically, and we'll show you a demo of that. And then finally, the button at the bottom where we're saying, right, when we click this, we want it to save the case. And again, that's a JavaScript controller method in here. So the first thing it needs to do for the Lightning Data Service is when you first create the component, we have another init handler here, which you've seen. On this component, it calls do init, and this one grabs that Lightning Data Service record data. It calls get new record. It passes in the type of record it needs. In this case, we don't need a record type ID, so that's null. We also don't want to avoid the cache, so that's false. And then the callback is just an example for things you can do later if you want to do more advanced functionality, so don't worry about that. So what that'll do is it'll return you a new case object. So when you come through, the new case object is sat in the attribute, which means you can use it to grab the subject, which is what we're doing. And then when you save, you're clicking handle save case, and it goes through and again accesses that same record data and then calls save record. And it looks quite complicated, but again, the only thing that's going on here is you're specifying a callback method, which is an anonymous function. When you've saved it, what do we want to do? So in this case, it passes a save result through and says if the state is successful, then say, okay, the record is saved successfully. Fantastic. One of the other components that I've utilized here is a show toast, and you've probably seen this in other examples, where it's a bar along the top and it's green or it's gray or it's red with text in and a cross. And basically what happens is you can specify the title, the message, and then the type, which more or less just defines the color, and then you can fire that off. So when we save, it's going to show the toast message up at the top. And then finally, and this is a little bit more advanced, we're not going to have time to fully cover it, is you can call this notify close method on the overlay library, which will then close the modal itself. And if you follow through the instructions now, as I say, there's not going to be enough time, but if you want to follow it through, and if you have any problems, Twitter, fantastic, you can get in touch with us and we'll talk you through any issues. You should find you get this. So let me just refresh the page. We only have 3 minutes left. This is why I'm rushing you through. So So I create a new case. It's 3 open cases currently. I'm going to say I create a new case called test, save it. You'll see the modal disappears and the confirmation has been accepted. And then also we've got 4 open cases. Now that's being dynamically updated because of the code that we've added in here, where, excuse me a second. The close callback on the show custom modal is basically you can define functionality that happens when the modal closes. And in this case, what I want to do is call that do init again from the open cases controller, but I've now moved it into a helper method because you can't call controller methods from more than one place effectively. So everything should really be in the helper. So apologies, that was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. If you want more information, I'll be available and I'll be hanging around having a drink, so that's good. And then, hopefully we're all quite happy. Bob thinks you're a superstar. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any very brief questions? No, brilliant. Thank you.